Hello, Amberley.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm so well. How are you?
Good, thank you. Now, I think I have all the tech set up right today, but what I'm going to do is record it. So if we happen to disappear, I'm just going to upload this separately later on. Okay?
Perfect. Sounds
Let's
great.
see. Hopefully, Facebook is willing to cooperate with Zoom and we get this sorted. So, yeah, it is at the moment a double fingers crossed because that's as much as I can do.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me introduce you. For those of you that don't know you, this is Amberley Harris from Maternal Instincts by Amberley, and you are like the queen of breastfeeding everywhere I see you at the
Oh,
moment. But really, I love what you say. It's breastfeeding savvy for the modern mama, and I think that's really important because well, we are dealing with people in 2020 and we want to be realistic about the way we learn about breastfeeding, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Yes. And it's so outdated, so much of the content. So that for me was so obvious that, yeah, we want information delivered to us in a way that speaks to us. Women having
Mm,
babies now deserve that. And so
mm.
that, yeah, that's always how I wanted my content to be delivered.
Beautiful. So tell me, how did you actually get into this? Before we get into talking about tips and tricks and ideas and, overcoming what women are facing right now, tell me about you. Like, how did you come to focus specifically on breastfeeding and then creating your own business? Was that always your plan?
No, not
No,
always. No,
no.
I became a midwife first, and so I worked at a major tertiary hospital here in Melbourne. So I've worked as a midwife for 11 years now, and I loved it. Like I loved working in the multidisciplinary team, and I loved rotating through all the areas. But it became pretty clear early on that I felt very disheartened working in the hospital setting,
Mm,
and I didn't think that I was going to stay there forever. I wanted to get a lot of experience, and that was important to me. And so I stayed on for 5 years, had my babies, and then just knew again early on probably that my passion really lies in breastfeeding support. And so I just probably the biggest change for me was when my sister had her first baby, and I helped her a lot at home. I actually ended up moving in with her for the
oh,
first
wow.
couple of weeks because she just had so much happen with her breastfeeding, and she's a naturopath, and
Oh,
so
wow.
super passionate about breastfeeding, but she just had such a rough time.
Mm,
And I realized seeing the midwives come to visit her at home, they would do the home visit and then go, and then they'd come back, 2 days later and go. And meanwhile, all this stuff was happening with
mm,
my sister's breastfeeding, and they weren't there to help her. I mean, they couldn't be in that framework, but I just sat there looking on at my sister, and obviously I was the one helping her with a lot of it, thinking there is so much more that midwives can do in the first 6 weeks, and the hospital setting doesn't allow it. And so
mhm,
it was such an obvious business decision for me to just go, well, I'm going to help women in the first 6 weeks, because statistically, if you look at our stats, we have great initiation rates, but a lot of our breastfeeding statistics drop off in the first 6 weeks,
mm,
and it's because women get so poorly supported at home, and there's lots of reasons why
mhm,
breastfeeding is problematic, but for me it was so obvious that I knew I could make a big difference to a mother's breastfeeding journey if I could see them consistently over the first 6 weeks. And so that was where the whole concept of my business began. And yeah, I've been in private practice now for 4 years, and I absolutely love it. I'm doing exactly what I set out to do, and wonderfully feel like I am really having that kind of positive impact on the women that I work with on their breastfeeding journeys.
yes. So tell me, when you talk about statistically about that first 6 weeks, if women are still, having a healthy breastfeeding relationship at is that like kind of the mark that gives you a good idea that it's going to go on successfully for longer as well? Like, is that kind of the term?
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly. It's like I call it the golden 6 week mark, because
Mm,
if you can make it to the first 6 weeks, exactly that, you're likely to go on and successfully breastfeed for, a very long time, or for as long as you
mm,
want to.
mm,
I follow the World Health Organization guidelines, and I have a 662 movement. So what it is that my content and the work that I do is designed to help women learn how to breastfeed over the first 6 weeks. So that's my sort of contribution to the the 662. The other numbers are the World Health Organization guidelines. So if I can help women successfully breastfeed over the first 6 weeks, they can go on and exclusively breastfeed for the first 6 months and continue breastfeeding until their child turns 2 or beyond.
Yep.
So that's what my 662 movement is about, because, you know, if you can't get to the first 6 weeks, you're not going to probably go on and do the 6 months or the 2 years. So my passion and motivation lies in helping women in the first 6 weeks.
I had some troubles with my first little one, and we were living in Dubai at the time, so a different kind of, you know, medical system and support system and that kind of stuff. And we had done a hypnobirthing course over there, and she gave us this name of a French doctor, she was a lactation doctor. I don't know what. Yeah. And anyway, it was my husband that called her on morning 5 and said, this, you know, we need to see you today. Yes. And I went that day and we snipped a little tongue tie, and, you know, things drastically changed. I remember her saying to me that day, I promise, you know, somewhere just, you know, after 6 weeks-ish, you'll realize you pick your baby up one time in the middle of the night and you'll realize you're trying to feed her feet rather than her head. You know, like, you don't have to think about it that much. And I thought at the time, there is no way, because every single feed demanded so much, you know, in the day 5. All I could think about was, how do I do this and how does she latch? And I was like, there is no way that I'm going to be able to pick her up one night and not have to think about it. Do you know? One night I did, you know, I picked her up and I was like, it was a sleepy feed, you know, one of those ones where you can't be still. And I was like, yeah, it's right. One time you do realize that I'm not having to think about every, you know, every little detail of everything, because in those early days when even though mums and babies are perfect pairs, we're both learning together as a team, aren't we? And there is so much to try and figure out together. Yeah.
So true. That's so wonderful that you got there, because I feel like so many of the mothers I work with, they just think I'm lying to them, and I keep saying it's going to get easier, it will get better, just break it down one day at a time, 1 week at a time. Focus on
one feed at a time, not even a week at a time, you know. It was like and I'm gonna say I kind of thought she was lying too. Like, I was like, it's not gonna get better, you know, like it can't possibly get easier, but you know, it did with the right support, you know. She was my support. Okay, so tell me, I mean, I don't know if what you're seeing with your community and the women that you're working is actually different, but let me phrase this question and you can tell me. Amongst what we're seeing right now with changes in people's birthing situations, you know, in terms of hospital policies right now amongst this pandemic and stuff. Policies in the hospitals, care afterwards, social distancing, maybe family not being able to visit afterwards at home, all that kind of stuff. Are you seeing different issues or different worries compared to what you ordinarily see in breastfeeding women? Or is it still the same things, like still worrying about it, you know, attachment and cluster feeding, and all, are their worries still the same?
No, I definitely think there's been a shift in what women are worrying about. I've seen a huge increased motivation in women wanting to breastfeed, which is wonderful. I mean, the benefits of breastfeeding have always been there, but I can see that, mothers are much more now really, really driven to want it to all work out. Which is wonderful. The other thing too that probably isn't so wonderful is the panic around what if they can't get formula. And I've had a lot of my my clients who, a lot of my guidelines I recommend on establishing breastfeeding and ideally avoiding formula to help women bring in a full milk supply and not do anything that's going to compromise their milk production. So I've had clients contact me and say, what if I can't get formula because people are panic buying, and so that's been a new thing that I'm like, why are you worried about that? Like, we can still establish your breastfeeding, your body, and all of this will work very well with the right support. So that's probably one thing that I've noticed, just with the way people are panic buying. It seems to be creating.
That's really interesting.
Saying, I've bought a bottle, I've got a tin of formula at home, and I'm like, why does that bring you comfort? Like, you're wanting to breastfeed. So there's a strange amount of energy around it right now, and it definitely is different, I think.
And so in terms of the services that women get access to in hospitals normally postnatally compared to what they're getting now, are you seeing is there a difference, or are most hospitals even, I mean, I know you do private practice, but is the hospital system adapting? Are they doing online support for women when they're trying to breastfeed or anything like that? Or you need to go private if you want support after you leave the hospital now?
They are still doing home visits, but
Oh, are
depending
they?
on the hospital, they're capping them at 15 minutes. This is for the midwives. So midwives are still seeing women at home, but for a 15-minute period. So again, I'm having women contact me to say, the midwives have come, but I couldn't do a full feed with them. So can you come to my house? Or the difference is, so that's the midwives, but the maternal and child health nurses in the community, they are not doing home visits. A lot of the councils have stopped that altogether. So that's been a real problem with the mothers that I'm working with, because their babies haven't been weighed. And so, you know, we although I teach women a lot of other ways to review that their milk supply is working well, their baby's weeing and pooing, their baby's content when they come off the breast, all that sort of thing, it is still helpful to know every, you know, couple of weeks or wherever they're at, how their baby's going on the scales, and we're just not able to get babies weighed. So I've had mothers putting their babies in their
Thermomix. Yeah, I was going to guess that.
One of them, he broke the Thermomix. So one of them,
he was getting plenty of milk. Yeah.
Yes, so she said I couldn't get the Thermomix. So another one was using those scales that you can get at Kmart when you weigh
like a luggage one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can tell by what you're doing, a luggage one, yeah.
Which apparently are surprisingly accurate. So, you know, you've got to do what you've got to do. And then a lot of them are like, do I need to buy scales? And I'm like, no, like, I don't think we necessarily have to spend $200 on baby scales. The council will surely have a plan with this going forward. But yes, definitely there has been a big shift in the amount of support. And, or, you know, the hospitals are saying, well, we can do a phone appointment. And a lot of mothers are like, well, that's not going to be enough for me. I need someone to come and help me at home with my breastfeeding. So that's certainly where
So how do you help your clients interstate? Do you do a lot of online, like will you do video calls and watch the feed with them?
Correct. I do a lot of digital appointments, so it's been okay for me in the fact that I'm set up for that, and I do it a lot. And I have a full video series. So the reason I've put that together is so that visually, if women need help, looking at how does positioning and attachment work, or how does their baby open their mouth wide, what is it about the timing? I can send them some videos and say, watch this, and this is going to help sort of solidify that knowledge. So that's been great for that model of care for me. In terms of the mothers that are in my catchment area, I am still seeing mothers at home, but obviously I have to follow really strict guidelines in order to do that. Yeah,
sure. Okay, so I in this group, I've got some women that are preparing for baby's arrival, and there are some women that are almost there and have got brand new babies too. So can you perhaps give us a couple of tips right now for people that are preparing for their breastfeeding, and for those that have already just, you know, maybe they're starting, or any ideas right now on some really practical tools that are really useful for them to start a really healthy relationship with their breastfeeding?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to clarify, do you want it specific about COVID-19, or this is breastfeeding specific?
So when people are learning in that preparation phase, is there really anything that's specific to COVID-19 that we need to consider? I was thinking, not really, is there?
No. The main thing is just that there has been some hospitals that have come out. There's a hospital in Sydney, for example, that have said for the separation of mothers and babies, if the mother has a confirmed case of COVID-19. And that is a very, that's not a practice that's actually recommended. It's going against the Centre for Disease Control and the studies that have been done through the World Health Organization. The recommendation is to keep mothers and babies together and keep them breastfeeding. So I guess that's the main thing, not knowing where some of these mothers that you're working with or in your group that are going to be birthing. I would say the recommendation is breastfeed and keep your baby with you.
With that in mind then, so at this point in time with the pandemic, whether you've potentially been exposed or whether they theoretically think someone does or anything like that, the recommendation is breastfeed and stay with your baby. So then in that case, our practical advice is really very much the same, isn't it? Because we're saying do the breastfeeding.
It is. Perfect.
Okay, perfect. So then preparing for?
So yeah, preparing for. So I guess the thing to remember, whether it's within this pandemic or not, is that you can seek breastfeeding education that's not just in the hospital setting. And I often find that the best way to prepare for breastfeeding is to do some education in pregnancy. The mothers that I meet that have done this, I can tell they have this understanding of breastfeeding before it's all began, and it really just puts them ahead of the game. So I guess that's the first thing I would say is find some resources that are going to help you understand all the different parts of breastfeeding. So I have a video series that I can reference for you if you want, to give you a link, and I'm more than happy to give your group a discount as well on the videos, of course. And so the cool thing about the videos is the content that I cover is very different to what's in the hospital setting, for example, because, and I know that because I used to teach those classes in the hospital that taught women about breastfeeding. And they can be great. There can be some great information, but I think when you're preparing for breastfeeding, you need to consider the whole breastfeeding continuum. So what I mean by that is, what can you do in pregnancy to prepare yourself for breastfeeding? The most obvious thing is learning how to hand express your colostrum is a great skill to do, to learn your boobs, to stimulate your colostrum to flow. Obviously, you need medical clearance to do this, and you wouldn't do it until you were 37 weeks plus. And yeah, you need medical clearance, but like that's one example in the antenatal period. Continuing on the continuum would be things that are going to impact in your birth, that are going to impact your breastfeeding journey. So if you know you're going to need a cesarean, or you know you're going to be induced, or you know you're hoping to avoid pain relief, but say for example you do have some pain relief, how are all these going to impact your breastfeeding journey? Because so often mothers are not really told that. They will get the information about how it's going to impact their birth. You know, we're going to do an epidural now, and so that's going to impact your need to push or whatever. You might need some help with the vacuum, but they might not be told anything about how that's going to impact their breastfeeding. Yeah. So there's the breastfeeding information about the birth. Then I've got a video that's completely on the breast crawl. So the breast crawl is a sequence that all babies do after they're born, and it's
mind-blowing,
magic.
isn't it? Yeah.
And it's this amazing thing that we as mammals are perfectly capable of doing, but unfortunately it's sped up in the hospital. Quite often mothers, you know, hospitals are busy. They're often, there's other mothers that are coming into birth, and they might need the room, and so once the baby's been born, they don't always let babies do the breast crawl that can take up to an hour, and then self-attach and do a full breastfeed on both sides if the baby wants to. So I think it's also really good to learn about the breast crawl, learn what it's going to look like, what are the stages, because they're all the same. It's been very heavily studied, and babies do the same sequence the whole time. So learn that so that you know when you're there with your baby, you can identify those stages and you can see it all unfold organically before your eyes.
Aren't they clever?
Yes, I love it too.
Clever.
Yeah, I think it's honestly my favourite thing about breastfeeding.
And does it actually, so I remember this doctor that I saw in Dubai, she was teaching me about that, and even though Hattie had already obviously been trying to feed, and she said, you know, she's still got this reflex, so let's try and help her, because it also helps with getting a really good latch. Is that right?
It does, exactly. Yeah. And that breast crawl is reproducible for months after the birth. So I always encourage mothers to tap into that instinct and let your baby use that as a way to learn how to breastfeed properly. So yeah, it's really important. I
remember I was 7. Sorry, just interrupt for 1 second. I headed off started studying to be naturopath at uni when I was 17, and didn't know much about naturopathy, but I loved the idea that it had some nutrition, some herbal medicine, some massage, some counselling, you know, just bits and everything. And one of the lessons we learned about was homeopathy, and my homeopathy lecturer they just had their 5th or 6th baby, and it was one of the early lectures, just opening my mind up to the philosophy of some of these more alternative, you know, medicines. And he started telling us about the birth, and then how they had let their little baby do the breast crawl, and they wanted their baby to do the breast crawl because they wanted their baby to have its first achievement and success in life on the day that it was born. And I remember being there sitting there, I was very naive, sitting there thinking, what? Like, I remember being like, this seems really weird. But then afterwards, I was like, Wow, that's a pretty sweet philosophy to have, actually, that they're saying to the baby, we believe in you already, you know,
Yeah,
like you can do this already.
I
I
love
thought,
that.
yeah,
As
well, I
a
remember at the
parent,
time
that gives
thinking,
me
I was kind of like,
goosebumps.
wow, yeah, but it really kind of is like they're that clever, and we
Yeah,
believe in what their ability is very, you know, early on.
it's
But I
true.
think you're right with that one. It's very much that some people are rushed or are feeling like if it's taking too long, that they need to try and rush it, right? Whereas if you
Yes.
understand that it can take an hour just fine, can't it? And that's the
Yeah.
way they're going to
Yeah.
move through that. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Continue on. Sorry. Sidetrack.
Yeah, so that's the breast crawl video, and then there's a fourth video, so there's 4 in total, which is all on the postnatal period, and that's more on positioning and attachment and troubleshooting if you have challenges with your breastfeeding and you're thinking, why is this painful, or why does my nipple look this shape when the breastfeed finishes? It's got tips on how to fix all that. So
Perfect.
that's when I talk about breastfeeding education, that's kind of what I'm referring to. There's so much information out there on the internet, and you can kind of get anything. But I think what's important is that you can go to a place and get what's most relevant, and that's how all of that content has been put together.
Yep. But also in education through pregnancy does it isn't it statistically does set you up for a better relationship. It does set you up for a better breastfeeding journey as well, doesn't it? The
Absolutely.
theoretical knowledge, even though it's
Yes.
not practical, the
Yes.
theoretical knowledge does help women. Like it.
Hugely
Yep.
impactful. Yeah, it's massive. I think it's so. And the other thing too is that it gives you some confidence. It allows you to go into your breastfeeding journey. So much about breastfeeding is a mindset. And if you've only been exposed to the stories of, you know, all I hear is how hard breastfeeding is, my girlfriend couldn't do it, my mum couldn't do it. Sometimes it's hard for us to go into an experience thinking that's going to work out. But I think it's important to say that you can write your own story, and what's important is to just do the preparation and to believe in yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, and what about any really important tips to women that are on their breastfeeding journey? Is there any major stumbling blocks that you want to kind of cover off, or anything like that?
I guess the main thing is to know that it's important to still access support during your breastfeeding journey. I sometimes hear of mothers there's speed humps, maybe they have a drop in their supply is probably the most common thing. That happens over the breastfeeding journey. So, if a mother's period returns, or say their little one starts biting, and so that's going to impact their letdown reflex, things can pop up, and it's easy to go and seek support maybe from your GP or your maternal and child health nurse. And time again, I just hear mothers receive advice that is not conducive to preserving and protecting the breastfeeding relationship. So if you have things pop up, I would say always go to someone who works with breastfeeding day in, day out, so you can get the right support, and that you're not going to be told something that's just going to compromise your breastfeeding. You don't want to have established it and have this great relationship and then get poor advice that's going to send you down a path that's going to really affect your journey.
Especially when we're talking about really normal, like you said, speed bumps, or really normal, bends in the road. Like they're really normal things that happen, right?
Yes,
and
exactly.
so common, really common things that happen.
Very. Exactly.
I had a couple of questions come through. Is there anything else you wanted to add for that?
No, I think that's good. I think that's the main thing. Just seeking support along the way.
One of them you've kind of covered, which was the antenatal colostrum expressing. So given people need to get medical clearance, you mentioned go to their normal midwife appointment. Is that what you're talking about with that?
Yes, correct. Yeah. So normally if a mother has like a history of premature labor or having twins, things like that, we want to be sure that we're not going to interfere with that. Even though there's a very slim chance that it would put a mother into labor, there are oxytocin receptors around the nipple and areola, and we need to consider that. So just next time you're at your appointment, just say, am I good to from 37 weeks onwards, because that's the recommendation, from 37 weeks. Just say, once I reach 37 weeks, or if you already are, say, am I okay to start doing some hand expressing?
I find that women are a lot of women are getting that information if they've got gestational diabetes, but then other than that, they're not always getting the information. That's
correct. That's because there was a study done by La Trobe University called the DAME study, and it was done on mothers with gestational diabetes and the impact of hand expressing. And it was basically, they discovered that it actually is very worthwhile for mothers with gestational diabetes, because it reduced the chances of their babies having a special care nursery admission. So what we've basically done is, because the study hasn't been done on everyone, I think we can still say that it's still beneficial for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so,
and having that little supply there is only advantageous to women. If you don't need to
Exactly.
touch it, you don't need to touch it, right? But
Exactly, yeah. And quite often, most of my clients don't touch it, which is the interesting thing. They do all this great work and get their supply going through their pregnancy, the final weeks. They go in with this nice little stock of colostrum, and then they don't need it because they've got heaps of colostrum. They've stimulated it to flow. Yeah. So, you know, it's more anecdotal evidence with my clients, because obviously I haven't studied them specifically, but I think it's a very, very powerful thing to do. Yeah, beautiful. It's so good. Yeah.
Okay, another question. Do I need to prepare my nipples or my breasts for breastfeeding? And I wanted to ask you about something, because I've seen a product that you've spoken about on Insta and that kind of stuff before. So you do have a nipple product, but do you then just recommend it if someone gets damaged nipples?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. It's just it's a nipple butter that's got herbs in it. You love herbal medicine, so do I. And my sister actually makes my nipple butter, who's the naturopath. So there's specific herbs that are really good for just the wear and tear that goes with a mother's anatomy when learning how to breastfeed. So if you do get grazes or cracks, or maybe you don't get any damage, but your nipples are sore as your baby's learning, then you want a good product that's got a therapeutic benefit to apply. So that's why that's my preference over like something like Lancino that's on the market a lot, which is lanolin. But it's wool fat. It's fat from the sebaceous glands of sheep, which is kind of gross when I really think about it. There is some chemicals in it as well. So it's not my preference. I would always say to go with a product that's got a herbal component.
But nothing, you don't need to apply something like that before to prepare.
No, you don't need to do anything to prepare. Your nipples are designed to do this. So you might be doing all this stuff that meanwhile you don't need to do. So I would always just say it depends on your skin type, and it depends on your anatomy, like the shape of your nipple. How easy is it for your baby to grab hold of and draw back to the soft palate, and your baby's mouth. You know, your baby might not have any challenges with your nipples. So better still, just focus on what's happening at the time. You don't need to do anything to prepare your nipples.
Okay, and here's a third question that came through. This was from a new mum. She's like, she said, how can I cope with this cluster feeding? What can I do?
Okay, so I guess the first thing to point out is how normal and important cluster feeding is. Cluster feeding is what our babies are doing, is they're trying to stimulate more milk production commonly. And I don't know how old this baby is, but generally
her baby was brand new, like 7 days, something like that. Yeah.
Okay, so cluster feeding in the first 6 weeks is a baby telling us that they want our body to make more milk, and typically they do it in the afternoon/evening. And that's because we have the least amount of milk available in the 24-hour period at that time. So our babies are very clever, and they're saying, I am hungry now, I need you to make more milk. And so by doing the cluster feeding, what's happening with that is it's sending really important signals to the milk making cells in our breasts to say, make more milk right now, my baby's growing. The other thing that's really important is that, you know, there's the whole foremilk and hind milk concept. Have you heard of that before? Yeah. So for a long time, we've just been focusing on there's foremilk and hind milk. The milk at the front of the breast is the watery, thirst quenching. The milk at the back is the hind milk, where the fat content is. But what we've actually learned more recently is that it's more impacted as to the length of the time in between feeds. So if you go, 4+ hours without a feed, you're going to send a lot more foremilk through to your baby, because the fat content, the hind milk, sticks to the walls of the milk ducts, and it takes all the way through that feed for the fat to come away and go through our baby. But by comparison, when we cluster feed, when we have lots of feeds close together, we send virtually all fat, all hind milk to our babies. So that's just important to know when you are exhausted and you are sitting there cluster feeding going, oh, this is exhausting. Why is this happening? Well, actually, you're helping your baby grow. This is really important, and that's why it's good not to say, can you get your partner to take over? Can you not do a feed instead? Can you distract your baby? Better still, listen to your baby, follow your baby's lead, and feed them.
And it's more about then the mother making sure she can be as supported while she is cluster feeding, right?
Exactly.
So food and snacks and water and all that other stuff done around her so that she can just sit there and
Perfect.
nourish her baby, right?
Yes. So good. Exactly.
Yeah.
Put supports in place that's going to help you do that part. Yeah. So
Yeah.
true.
And you know, it is exhausting, right? And so then there's just that acknowledgement that it is, you know,
Oh,
it's exhausting and it's hard and you know, but it's also a phase that will pass too, isn't it? You know, like,
it's
so
true. It's
yeah,
a season. It doesn't,
yeah.
they don't do it forever. That it is really important in the first 6 weeks. Some babies can do it beyond 6 weeks as well.
Mm.
It's just, I guess the main thing to know is that it's totally normal. But it doesn't last forever.
It's actually a really like beautiful reassurance that your baby's got it exactly right, isn't it? Like your
Yeah.
baby's got it. Like it's telling your body exactly what it needs. It's just that it's harder on the mum because she's probably feeling a bit more worn out from it.
Massive. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we all feel it by the end of the day. We're all
Yeah.
like, I am so exhausted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. We've all felt that. Okay, let me just see. Sorry, there's another one, but
All right.
I'm really keen to try and expressing. Unfortunately, my plan was to get some more education from my midwife at my next appointment, which was 36+6, and collect some syringes. With the current closure of our services in the northwest of Tasmania, this appointment will now be via phone. Do you have any recommendations on where and what type of syringes I could try and purchase myself? So do you just get these from a pharmacy?
You can get them from the pharmacy. I recommend either 1, 3 or 5 ml syringes. And I go through all this in that antenatal video. So if you do want to see what it looks like, to where you position your hands, what kind of pressure, what it looks like when the colostrum starts to bead and how you collect it in the syringe, that's all in that video. But yes, 1, 3 or 5 ml syringes. Now you can get them from the pharmacy, but they are really hard to get. So the other option I find is to just do it online. Just search for 1, 3 or 5 ml oral syringes. The oral ones are better because they have the little cap
opening.
On the end.
Yeah.
And you can just have that. Then you could have them delivered. So
perfect. Don't even have to go anywhere into your pharmacy and try and get them. Okay, perfect. And here's one more question. What are your guidelines for feeding a newborn? Just feed on demand for the first 6 weeks and then find a routine after that, or what?
So I actually recommend always feeding on demand. Like, breastfeeding is a system that, even though we have the boobs, our babies are the drivers of our supply. So it's so wonderful if you can follow your baby's lead. And while yes, in the first 6 weeks, it's essential to establish your breastfeeding and to bring in a full milk supply, because we need to follow your baby's lead and work out how much feeding needs to happen for your baby to grow and thrive. But beyond 6 weeks, certainly you can create a routine if you want to with like, I don't know, your sleep or your day, if you want to go out for a walk or all that sort of thing. But in terms of trying to seek a routine for your breastfeeding, the thing with that is just that it can impact your milk production. If you are only going to feed your baby at a certain time for a certain length, things like that, you won't necessarily maintain the supply that your baby needs. So I wouldn't say to develop a routine. I would say your breastfeeding is still beyond 6 weeks going to continue being something that your baby needs when your baby needs it. And the other reason to explain that is because breastfeeding isn't just about hunger. Babies don't breastfeed just because they need nutrition. They breastfeed because they're hot, they're cold, they're overtired, they're overstimulated, they're trying to push out a poo, they're just seeking closeness and connection. So I would say don't limit that, just follow your baby's lead, be responsive. It's about how you create that beautiful bond and connection.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. Is there any other questions that you've got for Amberley before? I think I could sit here for hours and talk to you, but I know you're a busy lady, so I'm not going to keep asking all of my questions. But if anyone else has got any questions, pop them in there. Is there anything else you wanted to share before we wrap up? I'll just, how Facebook lingers by a few seconds. So while I wait to see, is there any other questions that or anything else that you wanted to cover that you think is really important for us to think about?
I think the main thing is just to know that support still exists for the mothers having babies right now. It is looking a bit different, and certainly I'm still helping women in person, but if I can't help you, I'm still here digitally. And I think it's just important to know that yeah, it still is here. I know it's we're all overwhelmed at everything that's happening right now. And my heart aches for the mothers having babies this year because it's a whole new thing.
Mm.
But I think that's what's important to know is that, yeah, you know, you're not alone and you can do this. Your body is designed to breastfeed, and yeah, there's never been a better and more important time to focus on establishing that beautiful breastfeeding relationship with you and your baby.
Yep. And I think in some ways, if we do try and look at, I do try and look at things, take what we can from circumstances and that kind of stuff.
No.
And I think in one way right now, the fact that women really can't go out into their, and I know that some women are definitely grieving the fact that their postpartum experience is not going to look like what it was. They can't go to a coffee shop and have breastfeeding catch-ups with their other new mum friends and that kind of stuff. So I do acknowledge that can be, people are feeling sad for that. But at the same time, it is kind of helping set up people for a really good, healthy breastfeeding relationship, as long as they get the support, because they're going to be at home with their babies a lot, aren't they? Like really just in their environment, listening to the sounds that their babies are making and sharing, all that kind of stuff. So I think it does, as a new mum, it does give people a really good opportunity to get to know their own little baby really well when you can't do all the other stuff at the same time.
So good.
And one other thing I want to touch on that you mentioned just then is, and this is partly my own experience, but I think there's probably someone else that will resonate with this too, is that even if when you've got through breastfeeding once, then having another breastfeeding journey with a second baby, it's still also really perfectly healthy to ask for and get all the support that you need second and third time around too, isn't it?
Oh, I think so true. Yeah.
Because every baby's different. Every mum and baby working together is different. And even though you might have got it once, it's still okay to reach out and ask for all the help and support you need second or third time around as well.
For sure. Yeah. And we forget as mums, we forget things. And a lot of that, you might have someone, like I often sit with mums who've had babies before and they'll be like, oh, that's right.
Yeah.
But we're not expected to remember all of this.
And that we develop subconscious habits with our breastfeeding. So the way we hold our toddlers when they're breastfeeding is very different to the way we have to hold a newborn. So when you go up and pick a newborn baby up and try and breastfeed again, or I had to try and breastfeed two babies again, it was like, wow, like there's a whole new learning curve again, because, you do remember it, but you're like, wow, that's right. They need a lot more security when I'm feeding them and that kind of stuff. And you just forget that stuff.
So true.
Okay, so there's not any more questions that have come through for now, but if anyone's got any questions, just pop them in the comments and I'm sure that Amberley and I can get back and help you with those too. So, so you're going to get me a link about this video series, right? Because I don't have something right now. Okay, you get that through to me and I'll put it in the comments when I get it. Thank you so much for your time. I'm so grateful for you being here with us today, because I think that it's like you mentioned, it's really important for women to get all the support that they need right now and know that it's really accessible. Like it's there. We just need to know where to go. And I feel like just typing in and trying to figure out everything from Google is incredibly overwhelming at a time when we've just got so many other new bits of information coming into our brain. So what's the best way for someone to connect with you if they're looking for some support? Is it, in your catchment areas, you're in Melbourne?
Yeah, I'm in Melbourne. Yeah.
So you're still taking on face-to-face clients?
Yeah, I service the eastern suburbs and the CBD. Are you in Melbourne as well?
No, I'm in Tasmania.
Oh, you're in Tasmania. Okay.
Yeah.
So otherwise, my website is maternal-instincts.com.au.
I might put that in the comments too.
Perfect. Yeah. Through the contact form, or I'm on Instagram and Facebook as well.
Yeah, perfect. And that way, if someone's not in your area, they can also do an online consultation with you to get some help too. Beautiful. Well, thank you for your time today. I'm very grateful.
Yes,
beautiful.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. And I'll try and steal you again another time for another week.
Yes, amazing. I'll do the same with you.
Yeah, perfect. Let's do that. It'd be fun.
All right. Thanks.
See you. Bye, Amberley.